During Easter dinner, while pastel napkins were folded like fragile promises, and my mother-in-law carved ham at the head of the table as if she were presiding over a royal ceremony, my husband leaned close enough that I could feel his breath against my ear. His voice was low, controlled. "Careful. He's not my blood," Daniel whispered. "Don't make a scene." Across the table, our 8-year-old son Oliver was laughing with his cousin, chocolate smudged at the corner of his mouth, completely unaware that his identity had just been placed on trial between the deviled eggs and the crystal wine glasses. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I didn't even look at Daniel right away. I stared at my wine glass instead. The red surface trembled slightly, catching the chandelier light like a warning flare. Daniel leaned back into his chair and reached for a dinner roll, smiling at his father as if he hadn't just accused me of the kind of betrayal that destroys marriages. "Don't make a scene," he had said. He didn't know I was already standing. The room didn't fall silent immediately. It shifted first. Forks paused midair. Margaret's knife slowed against the ham. Richard's brows lifted just slightly, the way they do when a boardroom conversation turns unexpected. I rose carefully, not abruptly. Calm is louder than chaos. Easter at the Harper house was always a performance. Coordinated outfits, polished silver, conversations curated to sound effortless and successful. The Harper family didn't argue. They managed optics. They didn't lose control. They redirected it, and Oliver had never quite fit their polished image. They never said it outright. That's not how toxic family dynamics work. It was in the details. The slightly smaller Easter basket. The way Margaret would say, "He's so spirited," when she meant difficult. The way Richard praised Daniel's strong Harper features in other children, and went quiet when Oliver walked into the room. But this was different. Accusing your wife of infidelity is one thing. Questioning your son's bloodline at Easter dinner is something else entirely. I placed my wine glass back on the table with a soft, deliberate click. "I think," I said evenly, finally turning to look at Daniel. "If we're discussing blood, we should probably discuss everything." Margaret inhaled sharply. "Victoria," she said in that honeyed tone she reserved for social corrections. "It's Easter." "Yes," I replied. "It is." Daniel's jaw tightened. He gave me that look, the one that said I was being dramatic. The one that had worked before. The one designed to shrink me back into politeness. He had been planting this narrative for months. 3 months earlier, he'd started asking strange questions. Casual ones. About my pregnancy. About timing. About how often I had traveled for work the year Oliver was conceived. "You were gone a lot that spring," he'd said one night, not looking up from his laptop. "So were you?" I'd answered lightly. He hadn't smiled. At first, I thought it was stress from the family business. Harper Coastal Development had recently expanded into a risky Savannah project. Daniel had taken on more executive control. Pressure changes people. It makes them sharp around the edges. But then I found the charge. A discreet medical lab payment on our joint credit card. Vague description. Significant amount. When I searched his email, I found the confirmation. DNA kit. Express shipping. Subject line. Peace of mind. Peace of mind for whom? Back at the Easter table, I let the silence stretch long enough to become uncomfortable. "You ordered a DNA test," I said calmly. A fork clattered onto porcelain. Daniel laughed softly. "It's not what you're making it." "Isn't it?" I asked. Richard leaned forward. "What exactly is going on?" I looked directly at my father-in-law. "Your son is preparing to classify Oliver as a non-biological dependent." Margaret went pale. Daniel's composure cracked for half a second. "You went through my office." "No," I said. "I read the shareholder amendment you asked me to sign." The words landed like a dropped weight. In the event of marital dissolution, non-biological dependents would not retain equity tied to Harper voting shares. I hadn't signed. He had tried to convince me it was routine. Standard language. Now the truth sat in the center of the Easter table like a second centerpiece. This isn't about doubt. I said quietly. It's about control. Oliver looked up at me then, confused. Mom. I softened immediately and placed a hand on his shoulder. You're okay, I told him gently. Daniel stood abruptly. You're embarrassing yourself. No, I replied. You tried to erase our son. The room went still. Not polite stillness. Heavy stillness. Daniel's eyes burned into mine. You have no idea what you're starting. I held his gaze. Oh, I said softly. I absolutely do. And for the first time since he whispered that line in my ear, I saw something new in his expression. Not confidence. Not control. Fear. 3 months before Easter, Daniel didn't accuse me outright. He curated doubt. It started on an ordinary Tuesday night while Oliver was upstairs building a Lego spaceship, and Daniel sat at the kitchen island with his laptop open. Sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows like he was carrying the weight of the entire Harper Coastal Development empire. You ever think about how timing works out? He asked casually. Timing of what? I said. Rinsing a plate. Our first year of marriage. You were traveling a lot. I dried my hand slowly. So were you? He shrugged without looking at me. Just making conversation. But it wasn't conversation. It was positioning. Over the next few weeks, the comments continued. Articles forwarded about paternity fraud. Offhand remarks about how common DNA tests had become. Jokes delivered too carefully to be jokes. Men never really know, he said one evening, smiling like it was harmless. Each time, I brushed it off. I told myself it was stress. The Savannah Coastal Project had been hemorrhaging money. Environmental compliance delays. Investors getting nervous. Daniel had taken personal responsibility for stabilizing it. Pressure makes people insecure. Or so I thought. The first crack came when I saw the charge. A private laboratory fee on our joint credit card. Not small enough to ignore. Not large enough to draw attention unless you were looking. The description was vague. Clinical. I didn't confront him. Instead, I waited until he was in the shower and opened his laptop. I wasn't proud of it. But when someone begins rewriting your reality, you stop worrying about etiquette. The confirmation email sat there like a quiet confession. DNA home kit. Express shipping. Subject line. Peace of mind. Peace of mind for whom? My stomach didn't drop. It hardened. That was the moment I understood this wasn't insecurity. It was strategy. Around the same time, Daniel began pressing me to sign updated shareholder documents. For tax efficiency, he said. Stacks of papers. Legal language dense enough to blur the eyes. One clause stopped me. In the event of dissolution of marriage, non-biological dependents would not retain equity tied to spousal voting shares. Non-biological dependents. I looked up. What does that mean? Standard language, he replied smoothly. Dad insisted years ago. Standard for who? I asked. He smiled like I was overthinking. I didn't sign. He didn't argue. He pivoted. Margaret started calling more often. Casual check-ins that somehow circled back to Oliver's resemblance. He's such a sweet boy, she said once. Doesn't really have the Harper jaw. Though, I laughed politely. But patterns form when you step back. One afternoon, I passed Daniel's office and heard him on the phone. The clause only applies if it's proven, he said quietly. I just need documentation. Documentation. Not reassurance. Proof. That word echoed long after the call ended. 2 days later, I received an automated notification from our bank. A transfer had been made from Oliver's college savings trust. The amount was large enough to make my throat tighten. The funds had been moved into a corporate holding account under Harper Coastal Development. It wasn't illegal. Daniel was co-guardian. He had access, but it wasn't random. When I asked about it casually, he barely looked up from his phone. Temporary liquidity management, he said. I'll put it back. Temporary. Like Oliver's identity. That's when I scheduled a meeting with Michael Reyes, the company's senior accountant. I framed it as curiosity, as wanting to understand the company better. As being a supportive wife. Michael closed his office door before he spoke. Daniel's moving assets defensively, he said quietly. Defensively against what? I asked. He turned his screen toward me. Projected liabilities. Short-term debt tied to Savannah. A private loan Daniel had taken without full board disclosure. The company wasn't collapsing, but Daniel's standing inside it was unstable. There's a shareholder protection clause. Michael added. Biological lineage determines long-term voting retention in divorce scenarios. The room felt smaller. So this wasn't new. It was built-in architecture. Daniel hadn't invented the weapon. He was activating it. That night, he asked again if I'd reconsidered signing the amended agreement. What happens if I don't? I asked. It complicates things, he said. Complicates what? The divorce he was preparing for. 3 days before Easter, the DNA kit arrived. He thought I didn't notice. He hid it in the bottom drawer of his office desk. I opened the drawer when he left for a board dinner. The box was unopened, which meant when he whispered at Easter dinner, he didn't have results. He had intention. He wanted the idea introduced publicly before facts could contradict him. I closed the drawer carefully. Then I did something he never anticipated. I ordered my own independent DNA test through a separate accredited laboratory. Not because I doubted Oliver, because I refused to let ambiguity become leverage. When the lab confirmed receipt of the sample, the representative mentioned something that made my spine straighten. There was a prior inquiry regarding the child, she said. By whom? I asked. She couldn't disclose details, but I didn't need them. I knew. Margaret. This wasn't a husband unraveling. This was a coordinated narrative. And by the time Easter arrived, I wasn't a shocked wife at a family dinner. I was a woman holding documentation. When Daniel leaned in and whispered, "He's not my blood," he believed he was detonating a bomb. He didn't realize I had already lit my own fuse. When you suspect betrayal, you look for emotion. When you suspect manipulation, you follow the money. 2 days after I learned Margaret had inquired about Oliver's DNA, I stopped trying to interpret Daniel's behavior as insecurity. I started reading it as defense. Another notification from our bank came in early on a Thursday morning while I was packing Oliver's lunch. A transfer. Larger than the lab fee. Large enough to make my hands go still. Funds had been moved from Oliver's college savings trust into a Harper Coastal Development holding account. Not withdrawn. Not spent. Leveraged. I stared at the screen while Oliver asked if he could bring 2 cookies instead of 1. Sure, I said absently. Daniel had authority over the account. As co-guardian, he could legally access it, but legality and loyalty are not the same thing. That afternoon, I drove downtown to meet Michael Reyes, the senior accountant Daniel trusted more than anyone outside his father. I framed it as curiosity. I just want to understand the Savannah project better, I said with a practiced smile. Michael hesitated before closing his office door. You didn't hear this from me, he began. That sentence alone told me everything. Daniel had taken a private loan to stabilize short-term losses tied to the Savannah coastal property acquisition. Environmental compliance fines had slowed construction. Investors were nervous. Cash flow projections were thinner than expected. He's trying to protect his executive standing, Michael said carefully. From who? I asked. From your father-in-law. From the board. I folded my hands in my lap. And Oliver's trust. Michael exhaled slowly. Temporary collateral positioning. Collateral. My son's future reduced to a line item. I didn't react outwardly. I asked another question instead. What happens if the marriage dissolves? He paused, then turned his monitor toward me. A shareholder protection clause highlighted in pale blue. In the event of divorce, voting shares tied to biological descendants would remain within verified Harper lineage. Non-biological dependents would not retain spousal equity rights. There it was again. Biological lineage. If paternity is questioned, Michael said quietly, it complicates future distribution. Complicates. That word had become Daniel's favorite. I drove home in silence, the pieces sliding into place. DNA test. Shareholder clause. College fund transfer. This wasn't about trust. It was about insulation. That night, Daniel asked casually if I had reconsidered signing the amended shareholder agreement. "What happens if I don't?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair. "It creates exposure." "For you?" I asked. "For the company," he corrected. But his eyes flickered. 2 evenings later, after Oliver was asleep, I passed Daniel's office and heard him on the phone. "The clause only applies if it's proven," he said quietly. "I just need documentation." Documentation. He wasn't seeking truth. He was preparing defense. The next morning, I did something that surprised even me. I scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney in Charleston who specialized in corporate asset protection. Not because I wanted to leave, because I refused to be unprepared. Claire Whitmore didn't look shocked when I described the DNA accusation, the shareholder amendment, the college fund transfer. "In cases like this," she said calmly, "paternity is leverage." The word settled heavily. "Even if the test proves he's the father?" I asked. She nodded. "Once doubt is introduced publicly, perception lingers. That perception can influence negotiation." Negotiation. So this was already a game. Claire advised 2 immediate steps. First, independent DNA verification from a separate accredited lab. Second, discreet financial tracing of any asset transfers connected to Oliver's accounts. Quietly, without alerting Daniel. I agreed. That evening, I opened Daniel's desk drawer again while he was at a board strategy dinner. The DNA kit was still there, unopened, meaning his whisper at Easter, if he followed through, would not be based on results. It would be based on suggestion. I closed the drawer carefully and searched his email instead. A draft sat unsent. Subject line: contingency planning. Inside, he outlined potential steps in the event of marital dissolution involving disputed paternity. Disputed. He was preparing outcomes before evidence existed. My chest tightened, but not with fear, with clarity. I wasn't reacting to insecurity. I was countering strategy. 2 days before Easter, the independent lab confirmed they had completed the analysis. The results were available in my secure portal. I didn't open them. Not yet. Because timing is power. If Daniel introduced doubt publicly, I wanted to control when certainty entered the room. The final piece came the night before Easter. Claire forwarded me a preliminary tracing of the college fund transfer. The funds had not only been moved, they had been used to temporarily stabilize a private executive loan Daniel had taken to maintain credibility with the board. He hadn't just questioned Oliver's bloodline. He had risked his future to protect his own. As I closed my laptop, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Tomorrow will be smooth." It read, "Let's not complicate things." I stared at the word smooth. He believed Easter dinner would unfold under his control. He believed his whisper would destabilize me. He believed I would stay quiet. He had no idea that the DNA results were sitting unopened in my inbox, and that I had already decided exactly when to open them. The room didn't erupt when I exposed the shareholder clause. It tightened, like a string pulled too far. Daniel stood at the head of the Easter table, his hand flat against the polished wood, jaw set as if he could press the truth back down by force. "You're twisting this," he said, voice controlled but fraying at the edges. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm finishing what you started." Margaret's eyes moved rapidly between us. "This is a family matter," she insisted. "Not something to parade. You whispered it in front of everyone." I said, "You made it public." Richard finally spoke, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "Daniel, is there a clause?" Daniel hesitated. That pause cost him. "It's standard protection," he said carefully, "in case of divorce." "So you're preparing for divorce?" Margaret asked sharply. Silence. Oliver shifted in his chair. "Mom?" I moved closer to him immediately and placed my hand on his shoulder. "You're okay," I said softly. "This has nothing to do with you?" But of course it did. It had everything to do with him. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" "Clarifying," I said. I opened the email from the independent lab. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. I didn't need to read the whole report. I lifted my gaze. "You are his father," I said clearly. The words echoed against crystal and porcelain. Margaret's lips parted. Richard leaned back in his chair slowly. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't look relieved. He looked calculating. "That doesn't change structural risk," he said quietly. "Structural risk. As if Oliver were a volatility index. As soon as you introduce doubt publicly," Daniel continued, "perception shifts. The board doesn't ignore perception." "So that was the point?" I asked. "Introduce doubt first." He didn't answer directly. He didn't have to. Richard's expression darkened. "You risked the family's reputation for leverage?" he asked. Daniel's composure cracked slightly. "I was protecting the company." "With our son?" I asked. He flinched. That was the first honest reaction of the evening. Margaret stood abruptly. "We will not destroy decades of legacy over marital tension." "This isn't marital tension," I said evenly. "This is manipulation." Daniel laughed sharply. "You want to talk about manipulation?" "Yes," I said. I took a slow breath and delivered the next fracture. "You transferred money from Oliver's college trust to stabilize your private loan." The air left the room. Richard turned slowly toward his son. "What loan?" Daniel's voice hardened. "Temporary positioning. Using our son's future as collateral," I asked. "It was secure," he snapped. "It was hidden," I corrected. Margaret's composure finally cracked. "Is this true?" "Daniel." He didn't answer immediately. That silence was louder than any confession. Richard stood. "Explain," he said. "Not to me. To his son." Daniel straightened his shoulders. "Defaulting to executive posture. The Savannah project needed liquidity to maintain investor confidence. I had authority. You did not have moral authority," I said quietly. "This is business," he shot back. "No," I replied. "It's betrayal." Oliver's small voice cut through the tension. "Are we in trouble?" Every adult in the room froze. I knelt beside him. "No," I said firmly. "You are not in trouble. You did nothing wrong." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Frustration finally visible. "You're turning this into something it's not." "No," I said as I stood again. "I'm stopping you from turning it into something it never was." Richard looked between us with a calculation I recognized instantly. Not emotional. Strategic. "Did you authorize any document under Victoria's name?" he asked Daniel. Daniel's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second. "That was enough. I've reviewed the filings," I said calmly. "There's a share transfer authorization bearing my digital signature." Margaret gasped softly. "You went digging?" Daniel accused. "Yes," I replied, "because you whispered doubt in my ear and expected silence." Richard's voice dropped. "Did you sign her name?" "It was procedural," Daniel said tightly. "Temporary." "That wasn't the question," Richard said. Daniel didn't answer. The Easter table felt like a courtroom. Margaret pressed her fingers to her temple. "This cannot become public." "It already is," I said. "Because the moment he whispered that accusation, he made it public." Daniel looked at me then, not as his wife, not as Oliver's mother, but as opposition. "You have no idea what you're starting," he said. I met his gaze without blinking. "I do," I said. "You wanted leverage?" Richard's expression hardened into something I had never seen directed at his son before. "You've exposed this family to risk," he said quietly. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. For the first time since Easter dinner began, the power in the room shifted. Not loudly, but unmistakably. I picked up my purse and turned to Oliver. "Let's go," I said gently. As we walked toward the door, Daniel's voice followed me. "This isn't over?" I paused just long enough to glance back. "You're right," I said. It's just begun. The house felt hollow when we got home from Easter. Not quiet. Hollow. Oliver went straight upstairs without asking for dessert. He didn't cry. He didn't slam doors. He just moved carefully. Like sudden sounds might break something fragile. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The DNA results were still pulled up on the screen. 99.9% probability. Daniel was Oliver's biological father. I stared at the number again. Not because I doubted it, but because I needed to anchor myself to something solid. This had never been about truth. It had been about leverage. My phone buzzed. Margaret. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. You've made things complicated, she said without greeting. No, I replied calmly. Daniel did. A pause. He had reason to question, she said carefully. Reason? What reason? I asked. Silence stretched long enough to feel intentional. You don't understand the pressure he's under, she continued. The company cannot afford instability, so he created it. I asked. You exposed it, she countered. There it was. Family unity meant silence. Stability meant complicity. You already knew about the DNA test, I said quietly. She didn't deny it. That was confirmation enough. After I hung up, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. An hour later, Daniel walked in. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask about Oliver. Did you open the results? He asked. Yes. And you're his father. For a split second, relief flickered across his face. Then calculation replaced it. That doesn't eliminate structural risk, he said. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. Structural risk. He's 8. The perception now exists, Daniel replied. You forced it into the open. You whispered it first, I said. He ignored that. I've spoken to legal, he continued. If we restructure now, cleanly, we can prevent further damage. Restructure what? I asked. Equity exposure, he said. If you cooperate, meaning sign the amended shareholder agreement, meaning relinquish spousal equity tied to Oliver's future voting rights. You tried to erase him to protect shares, I said. That's not what this is. Then what is it? He hesitated. That hesitation told the truth. It's business, he said finally. No, it was betrayal. And Savannah? I asked quietly. His head snapped toward me. What about Savannah? I know about the private loan, I said. The environmental fines. The holding account. The transfer from Oliver's college trust. His expression shifted from irritation to alert. You've been digging. Yes. And what else did you find? He asked. That question revealed more than any admission. There was more. I held his gaze. I found something you didn't disclose, I said. He went still. A recurring child support payment. I continued. Filed through family court in Jacksonville. The air between us changed temperature. That's irrelevant, he said sharply. It's absolutely relevant, I replied. He looked away first. Not because he was ashamed. Because he was calculating damage. She's not part of this, he said. She's absolutely part of this, I said. You accused me of infidelity while hiding your own. That was years ago, he muttered. During our marriage, I corrected. Silence settled heavily between us. So you want revenge? He asked finally. No, I said. I want transparency. He ran a hand over his face. You don't understand how fragile this is. I understand exactly, I replied. You introduced doubt publicly so you could activate a clause privately. He didn't argue that point. He couldn't. And you hid another child, I added quietly. While trying to classify ours as expendable. She's protected, he said defensively. From what? I asked. Acknowledgement. His jaw tightened. You think this makes you righteous? He asked. No, I said. It makes me prepared. He paced once across the kitchen. You're destabilizing everything. he said. You destabilized it when you whispered, I replied. He stopped walking. I didn't think it would go this far. That was the first honest sentence he'd spoken. You thought I'd stay quiet, I said. He didn't deny it. And now? He asked. Now, I said calmly. You don't control the narrative. He stared at me for a long moment. You're going to destroy the company? No, I replied. I'm going to protect my son. Upstairs. I heard Oliver's footsteps. Daniel followed my gaze. He's my son too, he said. Yes, I answered firmly. And you tried to use him? He had no response. That was when I realized something important. This was no longer about proving paternity. It was about dismantling a system that rewarded secrecy and punished truth. And if Daniel thought Easter dinner was dramatic, he had no idea what came next. The morning I filed for divorce. I didn't cry. I organized. Claire Whitmore's office overlooked the Charleston harbor. Sunlight bouncing off the water like nothing in my life was collapsing behind closed doors. Protection or exposure? She asked again, reviewing the final draft of the petition. Exposure, I said. She nodded once and slid the papers toward me. The divorce filing was straightforward. The emergency motion was not. We requested immediate freezing of specific marital assets tied to Harper Coastal Development, citing unauthorized transfer of a minor's education trust and suspected manipulation of shareholder equity. Claire didn't raise her voice when she explained strategy. If he framed paternity as leverage, she said, we counter with fiduciary duty. Fiduciary duty. It sounded colder than betrayal. Daniel was served during a board strategy meeting. Not at home. Not privately. In front of the executives, he had been trying to reassure about Savannah. He called within minutes. You've lost your mind, he said. No, I replied calmly. I found it. You're humiliating me in front of the board. You whispered humiliation at Easter. I reminded him. That was private. No, I said. It wasn't. 3 days later, we stood in family court for an emergency hearing. Daniel looked composed. Expensive navy suit. Controlled posture. Margaret sat behind him. Tight and pale. Richard was absent. That absence spoke louder than attendance. Daniel's attorney framed me as emotional. Reactive. Seeking revenge over a private marital misunderstanding. Claire didn't blink. This is not about emotion, she said evenly. This is about unauthorized financial movement and exposure of marital equity through disputed paternity narrative. The judge leaned forward slightly. Daniel's attorney attempted to minimize the college fund transfer. Temporary positioning, he argued. All funds intact. Claire slid a document across the table. Forensic tracing indicates the minor's trust funds were used as collateral stabilization for a private executive loan tied to Savannah Coastal Holdings. The courtroom shifted. Is that accurate? The judge asked Daniel. He hesitated. It was secure, he said carefully. That was not the question. The judge replied. The pause cost him. The court granted a temporary freeze on asset reallocation pending further review. Not a full shutdown. But enough. Outside the courtroom, Margaret intercepted me. You are dismantling decades of work, she said. No, I replied. I'm dismantling secrecy. Daniel didn't speak to me in the hallway. He stared ahead like a man recalculating numbers. That afternoon, Claire called. There's something else, she said. Forensic review of internal company filings revealed a digital signature authorization under my name, approving provisional share transfer. I had never signed it. They replicated your signature electronically, Claire said calmly. Forgery. The word didn't make me panic. It made me precise. File preservation motion. I said. Claire smiled faintly. Already drafted. We requested immediate preservation of all internal communications tied to shareholder amendments and Savannah reporting adjustments. Daniel came to the house that evening unannounced. You're escalating this, he said. You escalated it when you involved Oliver, I replied. You're going to bring regulators into this. If there's nothing to hide? I said. There's nothing to fear. His composure cracked slightly. This will hurt him, he said. Meaning Oliver. No, I said firmly. It will hurt you. 2 days later, Claire forwarded me a compliance memo obtained during preliminary review. Irregular reporting adjustments tied to Savannah revenue projections. Numbers softened before board disclosure. Not criminal charges. Yet, but enough to destabilize executive trust. Daniel called again. You don't understand the consequences, he said. I understand perfectly, I replied. This isn't about DNA anymore. It never was, I said. Silence followed. For the first time, he sounded tired. I didn't think you'd go this far. You didn't think I'd fight structurally, I corrected. That was the truth. He expected tears, not motions. He expected embarrassment, not exposure. The second hearing focused on preservation of internal records. Daniel's attorney argued that expanded discovery would cause reputational harm to Harper Coastal Development. Claire responded simply, reputational harm originates from conduct, not review. The judge granted extended financial discovery. On the courthouse steps, Daniel finally looked at me directly. You're risking everything, he said quietly. For what? I asked. For leverage. For truth, I replied. He shook his head. You've turned this into war. No, I said calmly. You did. I just showed up prepared. That evening, I sat alone in the living room after Oliver fell asleep. My phone buzzed with a new email from Claire. Subject line: Internal Audit Preliminary Summary. I opened it slowly. While not yet criminally charged, Daniel's actions were categorized as materially negligent and ethically compromised. Materially negligent, ethically compromised. Not whispers, not rumors. Documented language. The Harper Empire wasn't collapsing, but Daniel's authority inside it was cracking. And for the first time since Easter dinner, I felt something unexpected. Not revenge. Stability. Because this was no longer about defending my son's identity. It was about ensuring no one ever tried to weaponize it again. Power doesn't collapse all at once. It tilts. And then everyone notices? 2 weeks after the emergency asset freeze, Harper Coastal Development called an unscheduled board meeting. Not a holiday luncheon. Not a ceremonial gathering. A closed-door crisis session. Daniel didn't tell me. Richard did. Victoria, he said over the phone. Voice tighter than I had ever heard it. We need to talk. We met in his private office downtown. Walls lined with framed groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings. Decades of Harper legacy staring down at us. Daniel's portrait was still there, but no longer centered. You've put the company in a difficult position, Richard said carefully. No, I replied. Daniel did. He studied me for a long moment. Did he authorize a document under your name? He asked. Yes, I said. He didn't look shocked. He looked disappointed. That distinction mattered. The board is reviewing executive conduct, he said. Translation? Daniel was no longer untouchable. Meanwhile, Daniel's tone shifted. No more arrogance. No more subtle threats. Now there was urgency. You need to withdraw the motion, he said when he called that night. Why? I asked. Because this is spiraling. It spiraled when you involved Oliver, I replied. He exhaled sharply. You don't understand how fragile this is. I understand exactly, I said. 3 days later, a brief article appeared in the Charleston Business Ledger. Irregular reporting adjustments tied to Savannah Coastal Holdings. No direct accusations. No criminal language. But the word audit was printed in black and white. Inside corporate circles. That was enough. Margaret came to my house unannounced that evening. She didn't wear her usual composed smile. You've made your point, she said. Withdraw the complaint. This isn't about making a point, I replied. It will destroy Oliver's future too, she insisted. The Harper name carries weight. I would rather give him integrity than a name built on deception, I said calmly. She stared at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. 2 days later, the board announced interim restructuring. Daniel was asked to step aside pending full internal audit. Not fired. Not yet. But removed from operational control. He called me that night. "They've sidelined me," he said. "Yes," I replied. "You wanted this." "No," I said. "I wanted accountability. You've humiliated me. You humiliated yourself." Silence. Then he said something I hadn't heard before. I didn't think it would go this far. That was the first honest sentence he had spoken in months. "You didn't think I'd fight," I said quietly. He didn't deny it. The internal audit findings were delivered the following week. Materially negligent. Ethically compromised. Failure to disclose financial exposure. The board voted unanimously to suspend him indefinitely. Richard signed the order himself. When Daniel told me, his voice sounded smaller. "I built that position," he said. "No," I replied. "You inherited it." That landed, for the first time. He didn't argue. He came to the house the next evening. Not shouting. Not threatening. Just hollow. "You've destroyed everything," he said. "No," I replied. "I exposed it." "For what?" he asked. "For Oliver." "He's my son too." "Yes," I said. "And you tried to classify him as a liability." He flinched. That was still the truth he couldn't escape. Upstairs, Oliver's footsteps moved across the hallway. Daniel looked toward the sound. "He doesn't know the full story," he said. "He knows enough," I replied. "He knows I stood up." Daniel rubbed his hands over his face. "I was trying to protect the company." "You were trying to protect yourself," I corrected. That difference mattered. He looked at me then, not as an opponent, but as someone who no longer recognized the woman standing in front of him. "I underestimated you," he said. "Yes," I replied. He left without another word. Later that night, after Oliver was asleep, my phone buzzed with an unknown Florida number. I stared at it before answering. A woman's voice spoke quietly. "You don't know me," she said. "But I think we share something." I didn't need clarification. "I'm Elena," she continued. "Daniel's daughter is 6. Not anger, not accusation, just exhaustion. He told me he handled everything," she said softly. "Of course he did." I closed my eyes briefly. "He doesn't handle," I said. "He rearranges." Silence. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I just thought you deserved to know." "I did," I replied. After the call ended, I sat in the quiet living room. Daniel had divided more than assets. He had divided truth. The Harper empire wasn't collapsing. It was recalibrating. And for the first time since Easter dinner, I felt something steady. Not rage, not triumph. Control. Because the tables hadn't turned through chaos. They had turned through preparation. And Daniel was no longer the one directing the narrative. 6 months after Easter, the house felt different. Not quieter. Clearer. Oliver was at the kitchen table, tongue pressed slightly to the corner of his mouth as he worked through long division, completely absorbed in something that had nothing to do with DNA tests, shareholder clauses, or whispered accusations. That alone felt like victory. The divorce proceedings were no longer explosive. They were procedural, structured, predictable. Daniel was officially removed from executive leadership at Harper Coastal Development. The board's internal audit concluded with language that sounded clinical but cut deeply. Materially negligent. Ethically compromised. Failure of disclosure. The company survived. His authority did not. Richard stepped back into temporary oversight. Investors stabilized once transparency replaced denial. The Savannah project continued under new supervision. No dramatic collapse. No empire in flames. Just consequence. The asset freeze transitioned into negotiated settlement. Claire secured full reimbursement of Oliver's college fund transfer, with interest. The amended shareholder agreement Daniel had pressured me to sign was voided entirely. My equity rights were clarified. not contingent on whispered narratives. In mediation, Daniel's attorney tried one last time to subtly reintroduce the paternity angle, suggesting reputational uncertainty might complicate long-term financial structuring. Claire slid the certified DNA results across the table without commentary. Then she placed documentation of Daniel's undisclosed child support filings beside them. No raised voices. No theatrics. Just facts. Daniel stopped arguing after that. He stopped whispering. He stopped trying to reshape perception. Because perception had hardened into record. He moved into a smaller condo across town. Not disgraced publicly. Not arrested. Not ruined. But repositioned. Removed from control. He requested supervised visitation with Oliver. And the court granted structured parenting time. I did not fight that. Oliver deserved stability. Not further warfare. The first visitation exchange was awkward and quiet. Daniel looked tired. Less polished. Less certain. Oliver hugged him anyway. Children love first and analyze later. I didn't interfere. I didn't poison. I didn't narrate. When Oliver asked me later, "Am I really his blood?" I knelt down and looked him in the eyes. "Yes," I said firmly. "But even if you weren't, that would never change how real you are to me." He nodded slowly, processing in his own careful way. A week later, Margaret sent an email. Short. Controlled. Polite. She requested to see Oliver for the sake of family unity. I read it twice. Then I closed the laptop. Unity built on doubt isn't unity. It's management. Elena called one more time from Florida. Not to accuse, not to demand. Just to say thank you. For what? I asked. For not pretending I don't exist, she said. Daniel had compartmentalized us. Separate narratives. Separate realities. And in dismantling one manipulation, I had accidentally exposed another. We weren't rivals. We were variables in his strategy. That realization dissolved the last trace of personal vengeance inside me. What remained wasn't anger. It was boundary. Daniel tried once more to speak privately. "No lawyers," he said. "Just us." I met him at a public cafe. He looked older than 6 months could explain. I didn't think it would unravel like that, he admitted. "You built it on concealment," I replied. "What did you expect?" He rubbed his hands together like he was cold. "I was trying to protect everything," he said. "You were trying to control everything," I corrected. He didn't argue. "I underestimated you," he said quietly. "Yes," I answered. That was the most honest exchange we had in years. He no longer blamed me. He no longer accused. He just looked like a man who had mistaken power for permanence. As I drove home, I thought about that Easter whisper. Don't make a scene. Women are trained to smooth things over, to protect reputations, to absorb accusations quietly so the table can remain comfortable. But the scene was already happening. Silence would have only protected the manipulation. 6 months later, Oliver laughs easily again. He doesn't flinch when holidays approach. He doesn't question whether he belongs at a table. He knows his mother stood up. And that matters more than any surname. The real show didn't begin when Daniel whispered. It began when I decided not to. So let me ask you something. If you had been sitting at that Easter table, wine glass trembling in your hand, would you have stayed silent? Would you have protected the image or the child? I want to know what you would have done. Tell me in the comments. Your perspective matters, because so many of us have faced family drama, betrayal, and moments where keeping the peace felt easier than speaking the truth. And if stories about revenge rooted in strength, about hidden power uncovered, about tables turned without losing dignity resonate with you, stay here. Subscribe. Because sometimes the most powerful scenes aren't the loud ones. They're the ones where a woman finally decides she will not be managed anymore.